in just 9 minutes uncovers shocking truths from Tucker Carlson's interview with Qatar's Prime Minister. Media lies, war with Iran, Western scandals, and Trump's secret peace moves. Nothing is off limits. Why is Qatar under attack? Who really wants war? And what is the West hiding? Stay till the end to find out. Here are 10 key takeaways from the podcast. Takeaway 1, Western media attacked Qatar for its values. During the FIFA World Cup, Qatar faced heavy criticism from Western media, governments, and NGOs. Instead of focusing on football, they used the event to attack Qatar's cultural and religious beliefs, particularly on LGBTQ rights. The Prime Minister argued that this was not about human rights, but an attempt to impose foreign values on Qatari society. For example, he explained that Qatar has its own traditions and laws, just as European countries do. When Qataris visit Europe, they follow the local rules and do not demand changes. He questioned why Qatar should be expected to change its customs for a one-month football tournament. He also pointed out the hypocrisy of these critics who ignore human rights violations in other parts of the world while attacking Qatar. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 2, the West is trying to break up families. The Prime Minister suggested that some Western policies aim to weaken family structures, making individuals more isolated and dependent on the state. He gave a surprising example where an international organization told Qatar it needed nursing homes for elderly people to improve its human rights ranking. However, in Qatari culture, it is a serious moral failure to abandon one's parents. For example, he explained that in Qatar, parents live with their children, and it is considered a son's or daughter's duty to take care of them in old age. To satisfy the ranking system, Qatar built nursing homes, but they remained empty. He believes that the push for such policies is part of a broader attempt to break traditional family bonds. He also mentioned that strong family connections create stronger societies, making them harder to control or manipulate. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 3, the U.S. media attacks Qatar because of peace efforts. Despite hosting the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East, Qatar is often criticized as being anti-American. The Prime Minister argued that this happens because Qatar plays a key role in peace negotiations, which threatens certain economic and political interests. For example, Qatar has helped bring American hostages home and has worked closely with the U.S. on international conflicts. It played a major role in evacuating people from Afghanistan and negotiating ceasefires in Gaza. However, instead of being appreciated, Qatar faces relentless media attacks. The Prime Minister suggested that peace efforts disrupt the agendas of those who profit from war, leading to negative coverage in Western media. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 4, the U.S. asked Qatar to host Hamas. One of the biggest accusations against Qatar is that it allows Hamas to have an office in Doha. Many critics say this proves Qatar supports terrorism. However, the Prime Minister revealed that the U.S. itself requested that Qatar set up this office to allow communication with Hamas. For example, he explained that the U.S. government wanted an official channel to talk to Hamas, just as it once needed to talk to the Taliban. Qatar agreed to host the office because it believed dialogue could help prevent violence. He pointed out that many peace negotiations, including recent hostage releases, happened through this office. Despite this, some U.S. politicians attacked Qatar for simply facilitating the communication that Washington originally requested. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 5, war with Iran would be catastrophic. The Prime Minister warned that if the U.S. or Israel attacks Iran's nuclear facilities, it would trigger a massive war across the Middle East. He said that no country would accept being bombed without responding, and the consequences would be devastating. For example, he explained that one of Iran's nuclear sites is located right across the water from Qatar. If it were bombed, the radioactive material would poison the Gulf's water supply. Qatar, the UAE, and Kuwait all rely on desalination plants for drinking water, and in a worst-case scenario, they could run out of water within days. He also pointed out that many U.S. politicians pushing for war do not even realize how physically close Iran is to its Gulf neighbors. We're halfway through the video. Thank you for sticking with us this far. If you're enjoying it, please give us a thumbs up and share it in your WhatsApp groups. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to comment below. To see more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Now let's continue with the video. Takeaway 6. Qatar has no interest in Iran getting nuclear weapons. The Prime Minister confirmed that Qatar does not want Iran to develop nuclear weapons, but he argued that military threats and sanctions will not solve the problem. He said Iran's leaders have publicly declared that they will not pursue nuclear bombs and even issued a religious ruling against it. For example, he described how Qatar regularly speaks with Iran's government and has received assurances that their nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. He believes diplomacy is the only way to ensure Iran does not develop weapons. Qatar is pushing for an agreement where Iran follows international safety standards in exchange for economic benefits. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 7. Sanctions don't work, they create black markets. The Prime Minister criticized economic sanctions, arguing that they do not change government policies but instead harm ordinary people. He said sanctions push countries to find alternative ways to trade, creating black markets and weakening the US dollar. For example, he pointed out that Venezuela, Russia, and Iran have been under strict sanctions for years, yet they continue to sell oil and maintain their leadership. Instead of stopping them, sanctions have simply forced these countries to trade in other currencies, reducing US influence over global markets. He argued that sanctions punish civilians rather than governments and are ultimately ineffective. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 8. Trump's strategy to end the Ukraine war is working. Qatar believes that direct negotiations between Russia and Ukraine are the only way to end the war. The Prime Minister praised former President Trump's approach, saying his efforts, along with support from Saudi Arabia, are moving in the right direction. For example, he noted that Qatar attempted to mediate smaller aspects of the war, such as reuniting children with their families. However, these efforts faced difficulties. He believes that broader direct talks, as promoted by Trump, have a greater chance of success. He also suggested that while Russia's allies are open to negotiations, some of Ukraine's Western partners prefer to prolong the conflict. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 9. A Palestinian state is the only solution. The Prime Minister argued that the biggest obstacle to peace between Israel and Palestine is Israel's refusal to recognize a Palestinian state. He said that despite decades of discussion, Israel has expanded settlements instead of working toward a two-state solution. For example, he revealed that Qatar and other countries have offered to provide security guarantees for Israel if it agrees to a demilitarized Palestinian state. However, Israeli politicians have repeatedly blocked this proposal. He believes the ongoing violence is a direct result of denying Palestinians a homeland. Now let's move to the last takeaway. Takeaway 10. The green energy agenda is unrealistic. The Prime Minister criticized the rush toward net zero emissions, calling it unrealistic and damaging to developing countries. He argued that natural gas is the most reliable energy source for the future, and that many countries that abandon fossil fuels are now going back to using coal. For example, he revealed that in 2018, the International Monetary Fund predicted there would be no market for natural gas after 2050. However, Qatar ignored this and expanded its gas production. Today, demand for natural gas is higher than ever, proving those predictions wrong. He also criticized the hypocrisy of wealthy nations, pushing green policies while preventing poorer countries from developing their own energy resources. This summary captures the major points from the podcast, highlighting Qatar's perspective on media bias, family values, diplomacy, and global conflicts. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, please leave a like below and share this video in your WhatsApp groups. You can also discuss about this video by commenting below. To get more such videos in your timeline, press the subscribe button below.